This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 238 of the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network. In this episode, I'm sharing a clip from my conversation with Dr. Pamela Snow. This clip is taken from episode 158, Literacy and Background Knowledge, Essential Skills for Life. I love this clip because Dr. Snow talks about a really important distinction, especially as we think about how we prepare students for life, as well as how we prepare them for reading and make sure that we are teaching those literacy skills that are going to support students through their academic experience, as well as life outside of their academic experience. And she dispels some of the important misconceptions around really the debates that we should and shouldn't be having when it comes to how to teach kids to read. Unfortunately, there's many directions this conversation has gone, but I think this distinction between biologically primary and biologically secondary skills is a really important one that helps us understand how we learn language, how we learn reading, and it can inform how we practice in the schools, and particularly when it comes to skill building, especially when it comes to ensuring that kids have effective reading, writing, and spelling skills. One of the distinctions that I think is really important here, or just the elements of this conversation, is the debates, the either-or conversations that we get into when it comes to different stages in the K-12 years. The either-or conversation in the early years is, do we work on play or do we work on reading? Dr. Snow makes a compelling case for why we don't have to choose, why it can be both, and why we can't just say we're doing play-based learning and we're making sure that kids have a chance to play, which of course is very important for building a lot of these essential cognitive and executive functioning skills, but why this alone will not help kids learn to read. We also need to make sure that we are putting the effective direct instruction in place in addition to the play. Again, why it doesn't need to be either or. And then as we are thinking about the early elementary through early secondary years, how again, it doesn't need to be, are we working on comprehension or are we working on decoding? We can think about these things together. And then finally, when it gets into those older years, the secondary years, where we're thinking about where things like project-based learning come into play. Again, kids still, especially if they are non-readers, when they're in those secondary years, need that explicit instruction. And if we are doing things like vocational training, project-based learning, we don't want to have this either-or conversation. We want to make sure that we are working on decoding via effective direct instruction. We have decades of research to support this, which it continues to be evolving. And then we also can make sure that kids have those life experiences to apply and learn some of those other skills that are beyond reading and literacy, but if we don't give kids the effective reading and literacy skills, it is going to create access issues to being able to navigate some of those other life situations that they might experience, as well as their ability to participate in some of those other enriching exercises and things that might be happening in the secondary curriculum as well. I will link to the original interview with Dr. Snow. As always, she did not disappoint. Before we get going, I wanted to mention my two programs, the School of Clinical Leadership and Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. I have been thinking about the best way to navigate all of these things. Again, it's not either or. It doesn't need to be working on content areas and language or executive functioning. We need to figure out how to work on all of these things. There is not one magic bullet that's going to solve all of the problems in education. And that's why we need to think about building systems and assets, stacking them over time, just like we've done with all of the research in the field or in the movement that we are referring to as the science of reading. We're stacking and layering and deepening our knowledge, just like in our practice, we can stack and layer and build systems. In Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, I help you build systems for language therapy. So building some of those foundational skills that are going to support literacy, like vocabulary, syntax, semantics, morphology, orthography, and phonology that are going to support those word decoding skills and figuring out how to be meta so we are embedding some of those higher level cognitive processes as we learn vocabulary. So I teach you how to do that in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. To learn more about that program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. And I teach you how to build systems for executive functioning in the School of Clinical Leadership. And I also teach you how to build systems. How do we do this concept of asset stacking? How do we think about each clinical skill and protocol and collaboration tool and communication tool that we come up with to share information with our other team members while we are simultaneously building our clinical skills, our ability to teach different skills to students via direct instruction, and other service delivery models that can ensure that we have that high level content area instruction happening, that intensive intervention in those therapy settings that is so important for students, but also to make sure that we are using principles of universal design to make sure that this is also embedded in the general education curriculum. You can do this whether you are an administrator or not, but this is really an initiative that needs to be on the radar of school leaders. And I think that executive functioning is a tool that can really be the gateway to making a lot of this happen. So it's a very powerful mechanism for getting some of those systems in place, in addition to some of those other things that need to be happening in the schools to support the content areas. So the School of Clinical Leadership is my program that helps school leaders put programming and supports in place through multiple service delivery models that support executive functioning. To learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Now, please enjoy this clip from my conversation with Dr. Pamela Snow.
A really important distinction that has had more emphasis, more explicit emphasis in the last 10 years or so in the reading space has been the distinction between biologically primary and biologically secondary skills, and the fact that oral language is biologically primary. So this is drawing on the work of David Geary, amongst other people. And so, you know, all other factors being equal, children are going to acquire oral language. Now, that's not to say, and I emphasize this, that oral language is set and forget, because it isn't. The key adults in children's worlds, so the parents, preschool teachers, you know, other adults, childcare workers and so forth, are having a big input. And if you listen to the way parents engage with children, it's often quite purposeful at various points in the day in terms of how they're explaining vocabulary, explaining idioms, and scaffolding children's language use. So it's not, yes, it's biologically primary, but we have to deal with the paradox, I suppose, that it's not set and forget, but reading, writing, and spelling skills are definitely biologically secondary. So they're things that our brains haven't evolved to do on their own. We have as Steven Pinker describes it, a language brain that can become a reading brain if it is exposed, and ideally in the appropriate developmental window, which is probably age 5 to 8, to instruction that helps children to understand the purposes of print and the way that print and speech map to each other. In English, that means in a relatively or quite a dense orthography for historical reasons. So when we talk about things like a play-based curriculum, I think play is an entirely appropriate focus in the preschool years for developing language skills, social interaction skills, sharing, all the kinds of reciprocity kind of processes, imagination, awareness and appreciation of culture and so forth. But play is the appropriate medium, and children are going to naturally spend a lot of their time playing anyway, and
you would hope.
You would hope, and we'll pick up a box and imagine that it's a car or a doll, or that again, that's quite sort of biologically primary. But I think we have to be careful to understand that we don't develop biologically secondary skills through something like play. So play is important for a range of reasons, but we can't be relying on play to get children across that bridge from something that's biologically primary and natural to something that's biologically secondary and if you like, unnatural. It's not natural for us to read, write, and spell. We can do it. It happens to have very significant cultural value, and if you like, economic value for us as individuals and as nations to be literate, but we need to be taught how to become literate. And I don't think that distinction has been emphasized nearly enough in pre-service education. I don't think we should be saying it's either or, that it's, in preschools that they should be doing either a play-based curriculum or pre-literacy activities that help children identify letters and some letter sounds and so forth. Why can't we be doing both? This should not be, in my opinion, in opposition to each other, but we should be understanding that the preschool year is a transition year, where children are moving from the social, the interactional, the relational, the experiential into something that is going to be more instructional, because school is essentially where you go to develop those biologically secondary skills. So we wouldn't expect children to pick up algebra through play.
Right, exactly.
To pick up reading, writing, and spelling through play. So I think it just needs a more nuanced kind of discussion, and we can allay a lot of anxieties if we appreciate that we can be doing both, and doing both in a purposeful kind of way. I get quite a lot of flack when I say things in blog posts or on social media about the fact that we shouldn't be blaming parents when children struggle with reading. And when I say that it's the job of schools to teach children how to read, the job of parents, there are some people who really come out of their cages to debate that.
They do, for sure.
My position is that our challenge for ourselves should be to assume that or to think about a world in which parents are across the board not doing very much at home to support language and literacy. So therefore it all needs to be done at school, and school needs to be ready for children. Children don't just need to be ready for school, and they need to be ready for children at varying levels of, preschool experience of language and text, because the schools that do take it upon themselves to change their instructional model and take responsibility really for children's learning generally see a huge uplift in achievement and in engagement. But there's also often a huge uplift in teacher satisfaction, because the teachers are realizing that the learning that's going on is as a direct consequence of the instruction, the teaching that's occurring. And teachers often say to me, I had no idea what a 5-year-old could do in the reading and writing space until I started teaching explicitly with a scope and sequence, and then they never want to go back to teaching the way that they were before with using predictable texts and banks of sight words and cueing when they see that. But then teachers feel empowered, I think, to say that, as Anita Archer says, how well I teach is how well my students learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to ask one more really quick question before we can hear about where people can connect with you. But I would love, and this is not really a 5-minute discussion, but there's just a lot of thoughts about the preparing students for life, and we're being too academic. We're too focused on the school traditional academic skills, and it's not, especially because of the way that the world is changing with technology, that we're not really giving kids those problem solving skills. So I'd love for you to weigh in on that debate quickly.
Yeah, well, I don't think in Australia that we are being too academic. It's hard to make generalizations because different states, different sectors, and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
But I think if we often hear talk of so-called 21st century skills like collaboration, cooperation, creativity, problem solving, all of those kind of things. But really, they're not 21st century skills. They've been around for millennia. How did the Great Pyramids get built if we didn't have collaboration and cooperation and creativity and problem solving? So, we need to kind of fact check the idea that these are 21st
I like that.
skills. But I think it's also important to remember that, as a number of people have said, I think Natalie Wexler has said that knowledge is what we think with, that it's knowledge sticks to knowledge. And I can't problem solve about geology because I know nothing about geology. I have no background knowledge. So we need to be building students' knowledge of the world and of subject content areas so that they can think critically. We want critical engagement with world politics, with civic matters, with local politics. But if students don't have background knowledge, then they're going to be very prone to fake news, to very superficial levels of analysis that they're exposed to in the media. I want to live in a knowledge-rich society. I want to live in a community where people do have a solid grasp of history and geography and cultural understandings. Now, of course, there's going to be some relativity in those spaces. History is, a contested space. So that's fine, but you can't even be part of a contested debate if you don't have some background knowledge. We're hearing a lot about the tragic circumstances in the Middle East at the moment. But a lot of people would perhaps struggle to even point to Israel on a map, or when we hear about the West Bank, people might imagine that's on the western side of Israel, and it's actually not. It's on the eastern side of Israel, and some background knowledge helps people to think about current events and to understand what's going on. So I strongly favour a knowledge-rich curriculum, which means explicit teaching, teacher-led instruction, starting with explicit teaching, by all means moving into some project-based learning after we've got students all to the same level. And I think, that's what our secondary schools in particular should be really focusing on, building on the strong foundations, hopefully, that have been established in the elementary school years.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all of the links where you can go to learn about all of the great resources that we mentioned in this episode, as well as where you can go to learn more about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that helps SLPs and other professionals working on language to create a system for language therapy. You can learn more about the program at drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. As always, thank you so much for listening. It helps me so much if you leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you found this useful, please feel free to share it with your friends or colleagues. If you are interested in being a guest, if you would like to invite me to be a guest on your show, or if you have a suggestion for a guest, please send me an email at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.